at that time, no. And died tragically, being killed on the way back to prison. It's a very funny story. It's not something to laugh at, but he killed his wife, threw her off the balcony, and he was then in prison for a number of years, and as I said, died on the way back to the prison. But the typical Scouser comics were saying that, yeah, the same thing happened in Liverpool. The wife fell down to the floor, and someone ran down and put a chamois in her hand.
So that's all he needed to do, and he'd have got off.
Yeah,
That's what they said, yeah.
But
no, we
tragic
shouldn't laugh
story,
at that.
but a great fighter.
Yeah. Home on leave, you know, wasn't he? And
That's
they went
right,
back there
on the way
and not
back.
killed.
All right, we mentioned Hagler, Hearns, Leonard, and the rest. We may even find time for Ali when we come back. See you in a moment. The merits of the greats of all areas in boxing, trying to discover the identity of the finest pound for pound in the history of this toughest of all sports. Colin Hart and Reg Guttridge joining myself and Barry McGuigan. We talked in the early part of the programme, gentlemen, about the greats of the turn of the century and the early part of this century who fought so successfully in different weight divisions. But the thought occurs, Barry, that if we come to the more modern era, we have examples from the last 25 years of men who have been multi-title champions in multi-weight divisions.
Yeah, and that's where it's a bit of a misconception, because it's easy for us to get caught up with all of it. There's so many titles around nowadays. There's the proliferation of titles, and it's easier to win titles. There's no question about that. But there are still some great fighters, and Roberto Duran, for example, is the greatest fighter in my living memory. Haven't seen him, and this is a subjective decision, I'm sure you'll agree, guys, but the most attractive attacking fighter, and that's what I like to watch, attacking fighters, and that's what the general public at large like to watch, was Roberto Duran. Incredible fighter. Had his first professional fight at 16, and he's now still fighting, and this is 30 years later. He's a remarkable fighter. Beat Ken Buchanan, beat our own Ken Buchanan in 1972, stopped him at the end of the 13th round with a controversial blow, hit him low, and hit him late, although he was ahead at that stage, but Buchanan was still in the fight. Then he went on to dominate the lightweight division, jumped up to welterweight, beat Carlos Palomino in his first significant fight at welterweight, beat the great Sugar Ray Leonard in one of the best fights I've ever seen in Montreal in 1980. I remember that fight because we were actually training for the Olympic Games in Drogheda in Southern Ireland. We were in a training camp, and we were allowed to stay up late because we normally, lights were out at 9:30. You guys were commentating on it.
Cold too, as I remember then.
That's right.
Mind you, there was nothing in the fight.
Right to the end.
He was a very popular fighter in Canada, far more than Leonard was. And if I remember rightly, Harry Gibbs only gave it by 1 round, one of the judges, and I would have agreed with that. It was a very close fight. Okay, the winner just about deserved it, but that was it.
Reg, talking to current boxers, active boxers today, it does strike me so often, if you ask them to nominate the one man they've idolised in trying to get into boxing, answer comes back again and again, more than any other boxer, Duran.
Yeah, well, as Barry's saying, he was very colourful. You know, I think the greatness goes off a little bit by the second fight with Leonard. There may have been all kinds of reasons, but you didn't expect him to turn his back and do the no-mass bit. And then he got knocked spark out by Tommy Hearns later. That takes a little bit of the glitter off for my judgment.
So did Joe Louis.
Yeah, I know.
You know, so did Joe
Not
Louis.
Ray Robinson, though.
So did so many of the good fighters, and they were all beaten at some stage, and it was a lights-out situation. He was cold, and Hearns hit him at the beginning of the beginning of the second round.
That's right, yeah.
And took him out of there. But, you know, he came back then and won the light middleweight title, and then went up and beat Iron Barkley, a big middleweight for the middleweight title.
He gave Marvin Hagler a much harder fight than people thought.
Absolutely.
No, I'm not, listen, I know he was a great fighter and everything, but that's all that just bothers me about the word greatness with him.
Arguably the best lightweight that ever lived, and I'd love to have seen him fight Benny Leonard.
What a fight that would have been.
That would have been a wonderful fight. But, you know, he's a fighter's fighter because of his aggression. I mean, let's face it, he was an animal in the ring. He was an animal outside
Lived
the
a
ring
life,
as well.
didn't he, Colin?
And, you know, he was fearless. And, of course, he did get knocked out by Hearns, but Hearns could punch like a, near enough like a heavyweight. And if Hearns hit anybody on the chin like that, he would have knocked anybody out.
I remember he fought Dennis Andrews, and Dennis Andrews knocked him down 10 times on the way to winning the light heavyweight title. And, you know, he knocked down Virgil Hill and beat him on points too.
Tremendous puncher.
You know, so Hearns could knock anybody out. I just disregard that fight because he didn't get warmed up, and he proved, you know, and consolidated his position as one of the best fighters of all time.
Now, you know,
been outpointed again.
You talk about Hearns as being one of the all-time greats, and yet Leonard, I mean, beat him, when they were both in their prime. That was one of the great
that was a great
fight. That was when.
Oh, that was a
when,
superb.
I mean, Leonard was behind, and this is the great corner man, Angelo Dundee, and he came back to his corner. I think it was the end of the 13th round. And Angelo said to him, "Hey, you're screwing it up, man." He said, "If you don't go out and knock him out, you lose the fight."
He said, "You got 6 minutes to
He
turn
got
it
6
around."
minutes, and he went and knocked him out. Well, he
In the
didn't knock him
14th.
out in the British sense of the word, but he stopped him in the 14th round and saved the title. I mean,
What a
that,
fight.
Leonard was a
What a
much
fight.
harder fighter than people gave him
Oh,
credit for.
he
You
was
know,
tough.
because of his style and his looks and his little tiny ears and everything. I used
Yeah.
to think it was like Bambi getting mugged when people tried to, you know,
Well,
rough him up. But
Do you remember the fight
he could
against-
handle himself.
well,
He
you
could
see,
handle himself.
he lost the... I was in Montreal for that fight, and I agree with you, because I had to do a piece many years ago for Boxing News, the greatest fight I ever saw, and I put that down. Leonard Duran in Montreal was the greatest fight I ever saw. No knockdowns.
Inside fighting, Colin, right
it was
inside.
had everything you wanted in a fight. There were no knockdowns, there was no blood spilt, and yet it was absolutely
Yeah,
absorbing
toe to toe.
from first bell to last. And Leonard, I mean, he was a magnificent fighter.
That was a great fighter.
And was the greatness of Leonard because, as Colin suggests, he had the variety
Well,
of
he
fight inside
had
him?
real challengers. He came around at an era when there were fabulous fighters. He jumped up and beat Ayub Kalouli. He came back and beat Marvin Hagler. Well, I don't know whether he beat him. In fact, I thought Hagler deserved to beat him. But still, you know, I mean, you're talking about multi-champions and a time when there were many sort of weight divisions. And what about Alexis Arguello? What a fighter he was.
Have a word with Jim Watt about that. You know,
That's right.
I'll never forget it, Reggie. It was my second professional fight. And I said, I'm on the same bill as Alexis Arguello and Jim Watt. And I had so much respect for Watt. You know, I didn't particularly like his style, but I had so much respect for his professionalism.
even he would admit
and
was
his-
getting at the end of his
yeah.
career, but he hung in there for
Oh,
15 rounds,
that's
and
the
he was
thing about
banged up when he could have easily have got out.
Oh, I never forget it, because I remember him saying after the fight, and I was there, I sat in my training, in my boxing gear on, because I just fought Gary Lucas and stopped him in 2 rounds. I ran in, didn't have a shower, put my clothes on and ran back, straight back out again to watch Alexis Arguello and Jim. And I remember him saying afterwards, Jim, you know, I took my defeat like a man, and God, were those true words. He
You know,
got
the-
an unbelievable beating, and his
Alex
face
The
was like...
Arguello was
following morning,
tremendous.
I went round to Jim's hotel at Wembley, and his wife Margaret opened the bedroom door to me, and she said that she'd spent all night bathing Jim in the bath to get the soreness out of his body. And there he was, sitting at the table in his room, and blood was still coming down from his cut and his eyes. It was still hadn't stopped bleeding. That was the morning after.
Talking about Arguello, what a fighter he was. He was a sensational fighter. He won the featherweight title against Ruben Olivares. He
Who
beat,
also was a great fighter.
yeah,
by
he
the way.
was a superb
Olivares
fighter.
was a tremendous fighter.
Then he beat
Alan Rodkin.
Vilmaro Fernandez for the junior lightweight title, and then jumped to beat Jim Watt, and almost beat Aaron Pryor in that fabulous fight in 1983 that you commentated on,
Yeah,
I
I
think,
did,
in Miami.
Yeah.
Miami.
It was
What a
their
fight.
show, yeah.
And there was that mystical black bottle. Do you remember he came back after
Oh.
the 12th round, and Panama Lewis in his corner, and he all of a sudden he says, "No, give me the black bottle, the black bottle." And Pryor was exhausted, and he came out in the 14th round like he just started again, and then ground him
I've
down.
been trying to get hold of that back bottle for years. I could do with a bit of that.
But we
Set up with
haven't
those jump
mentioned,
leads.
Paul, with respect, we haven't mentioned Ali yet.
Let's
in
get on
this
to it. Joe.
greatest of all time, pound for pound. I think we've established that amongst ourselves that Ali is the greatest heavyweight of all time. Now, was he also the greatest fighter of all time?
I would have gone for Robinson, and as I said, Ali agrees with that too. He never thought he was quite as good as Robinson.
No.
There were
Not
other
much
great
in it.
ones, like we forgot to mention Marvin Hagler. I mean,
Oh,
one
of
fighter,
course.
he was incredible fighter in middleweight, and stayed at middleweight and dominated the middleweight division in a very good time. Mustafa Hamshaw, Juan Roldan, Tommy Hearns,
All of them, yeah,
turned
sure.
them all away.
And
Alan
stayed with the
Minter.
same manager and trainer,
Yeah.
never caused any problem,
Exactly.
and he's a gentleman,
Yeah.
and we could do with more like
Yeah.
it
And
now
also
in
had-
the fight game.
And also had the
Ultimate
good sense to
professionals, right.
retire and not come
Yeah.
back.
Well,
which is
the-
also
And
the-
still the
doesn't-
same weight, by the way. You
Yeah,
can
it's
still
still
make
the same.
middleweight.
Hagler, we all understand how deeply hurt Hagler still is today about the Leonard decision that Barry referred to. But he did have the good sense to get out of the game. Now, Arguello and one or two others that we've talked about hung on there long after their time was
Well,
gone. Does that
Aguero-
tarnish their greatness for you,
Well,
Colin?
No, it doesn't. It shouldn't.
No, it shouldn't do, because you think of these guys in their prime. It is very sad that they go on and on and on. But with Aguero, of course, he was very unfortunate because he lost a lot of his money and his property in the civil war in Nicaragua. So, you know,
That's
he
why,
came back
yeah,
was
victim
out
of
of
circumstance.
necessity.
Yeah, he
not
came back for a reason.
That's right.